Now, earlier today, I spoke with Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey ahead of the local elections on Thursday. Sir Ed Davey, thank you for joining us on GBN tonight. How are you celebrating Donald Trump's first 100 days in power?
I'm deeply alarmed by his record in just 100 days. The damage he's doing to the world economy, to jobs here in the UK, to businesses, to exporters in the UK, and then what he's done to the security of our country, our defence, the support for Ukraine, where he many times has seemed to have sided with Putin. This is really damaging to the world we knew. I've always been a strong supporter of the relationship between the UK and the United States. I'm a big fan of our relationship with the States. Have traditionally been our closest ally, but I don't think he's a reliable ally in what he says and does.
What do you think the victory of Mark Carney says to you about your position on Donald Trump? You've been explicitly against him from the very beginning. It's almost propelled Carney into power as a moderate, as a centrist in Canada. Does it make it more likely that you might be Prime Minister at the next general election?
Well, let's first of all congratulate Mark Carney and the Liberal Party in Canada on a tremendous success. What a huge turnaround. And I think that's because they have stood up to Donald Trump. I mean, what he said about Canada is outrageous. Canada is one of our closest Commonwealth allies. And I said in the House, you know, when we were fighting fascism in the Second World War, Canadian, American and British troops stood shoulder to shoulder, fighting, looking after each other. And that history and that important Commonwealth tie, where King Charles III is the head of state for Canada, I've always felt that we should stand up for Canada, whoever's against them, even if it's the United States. So I celebrate the victory, and I would say that it does suggest that many people, almost from whatever political persuasion, here in the UK and elsewhere, share the Liberal Democrat view that Donald Trump is dangerous and wrong. And I'm deeply alarmed that people like Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch seem to be muted in their criticism, and at times, frankly, have been cheerleaders for Donald Trump and Elon Musk and this
also
quite dangerous.
I mean, isn't it the case, though, that those politicians recognise the value of a special relationship? Isn't that more important than your antipathy towards one man?
Look, Liberal Democrats really value Britain's relationships with the United States. And in the past, we've had people who have been there who haven't shared our political views, but we've gone along with them because of that important alliance. But I'm afraid when the facts change, you need to respond to them. You need to be tough with someone who is against Britain in terms of our economy, in terms of our defence, and we need to call him out. And the fact that the Prime Minister Keir Starmer hasn't been tough enough, I deeply regret. I think he's wrong on that. Because I think if you stand up to bullies like Donald Trump, that's the best way to take them on. And what we've talked about is, like the Prime Minister's rightly done with a military coalition of the willing to support Ukraine, Liberal Democrats have called for an economic coalition of the willing to defend our economy and to promote free trade across the rest of the world, and so we can stand up to Donald Trump and say we have alternatives. We're not going to have your bullying where you divide us and separate us. We're going to stand together.
It's the first time we've spoken to you since that Supreme Court ruling. Do you know what a woman is now?
I absolutely do. You know, as the Supreme Court has said, in law, a trans woman is a woman, except in respect of the Equality Act. And the Equality Act is clear, and I totally respect the Supreme Court's ruling. Indeed, I accepted it on the very morning it came out.
So what is a woman? I mean, are you saying that in certain circumstances it can be a trans woman?
Well, I'm saying what the Supreme Court said. I mean, I believe in the rule of law, and I believe backing the Supreme Court is essential. I know in some parts of the right wing, they don't like the rule of law, and Donald Trump treads over the courts. Liberal Democrats don't. We support them. And, you know, they're very clear. You look at in paragraph 24 of their judgment, under the Gender Recognition Act, a trans woman is a woman, but in respect of the law, in respect of the Equality Act, that doesn't apply, where the gender is and sex is based purely on biological sex.
Well, GBNews viewers think it's a simple decision. I mean, a woman is a woman and a man has a penis. Isn't it that straightforward?
Well, I'm telling you what the Supreme Court says. That's the rule of the law. Well, let me give you an example of how confusing this can be. Now, a trans man can't go into a gents' toilet. A trans man, according to this ruling, has to go where their biological sex is. So a trans man has to go into a women's toilet, and that may be that trans man might have had a surgical procedure, might actually have a penis. So you can see how complicated it is. A lot of people want to talk about how simple it is. It isn't. It's a bit more complicated, as indeed the ruling shows. I've read the 88-page ruling. I want to tell you what I think we should happen now, because people want to know what the practicalities are, and that's the issue. We're going to need guidelines and a debate about how we take this forward. There are a lot of unanswered questions. How does it work in practice? How is it enforced? These are real questions. And what Liberal Democrats are saying, there should be debate in Parliament. We're very happy to engage in debate so we can get this right for people. We absolutely have to respect the rights of everybody.
Labour peer Lord Glassman, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, they're supporting an inquiry into the grooming gangs. Would you support an inquiry into these rape gangs?
We've been prepared to look at all forms of inquiry from the start, but what we've said, as well as looking at inquiries, the findings, recommendations of the last inquiry, which lasted quite a few years, should be implemented.
Baroness J.
Baroness J, exactly. She had an inquiry into child sex abuse, and unfortunately, even though it concluded a few years ago, the Conservatives, including Kemi Badenoch, refused to implement the recommendations of an inquiry. So very much open to future inquiries, but unlike Reform, unlike the Conservatives, we want the recommendations of the previous inquiry to be implemented. And I'll tell you why. We want to protect children now, and I'm afraid other politicians seem to not worry about children now. Liberal Democrats do. There are those recommendations, and we're determined to protect children now. And I just slightly wonder whether by failing to get behind the recommendations of the inquiry we've already had, some people are playing politics with that. I'm not prepared to play politics with the safety of our children and young people.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private Internet Access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GBNews discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GBnews to start protecting yourself digitally today.
So far this year, 10,000 people have crossed the English Channel to get into Britain illegally. How would you stop the boats?
We have to stop the boats.
How would you do it?
It's dangerous. Well, I'm coming to that, but let me be really clear. Liberal Democrats have always said we've got to stop these boat crossings, and there's several ways that you do that. First of all, you make sure that if someone tries to come and claim asylum here, their application is processed really quickly, and then if they fail, they get sent back. You know, that's what's been lacking, a tough approach where we deal with these promptly and securely. The other thing we want to do is we want to make sure we're working with international partners really rigorously to crack the organised crime gangs. And the Conservatives completely failed to do that, and I'm not yet convinced that Labour's done enough.
What Labour's doing is not working.
Here's the point. I don't think Labour's doing it well enough. So if you look about how you cooperate with our European partners, obviously that's where the other side of the channel, you've got to look at the lessons from the Dublin Convention. You've got to look at things like European arrest warrants and those tools that we had before when this issue wasn't a problem, before the treaty that Boris Johnson did with Europe.
What do you think of Home Office plans for a one-in, one-out returns agreement with France, allowing migrants in France to come over here and one here to be sent back to the continent?
We should look at all that. We've got to stop the boat crossings. The Conservatives failed dreadfully. They had a shocking record on it, and they wasted hundreds of millions of pounds on a scheme that was never going to work. They played politics with this. We've got to be realistic. Everybody knows that unless you tackle the crime gangs, unless you get people deported when they shouldn't be here, we won't tackle it.
How do you feel when criminals like drug dealers use the right to a family life under the European Convention on Human Rights to stay in the UK and not be deported?
You have to look at every case. There are some cases, and I've had experience in my own constituency, where people have tried to do that, and frankly, that's not a defence. When they've been the victims of some appalling crimes, and the person has tried to use the law to escape deportation. And so I've got a strong record on that. But the question is, why you can't generalise, Chris, is that every case needs to be looked at itself. So it'd be wrong for me to generalise, it'd be wrong for me to second guess the courts, but I have experience of this being abused.
We're hearing Sir Keir Starmer might allow a new freedom of movement agreement for 18 to 30-year-olds. Does that go far enough in terms of UK's reset with the European Union?
Well, we've always been positive about the prospect of a youth mobility scheme with Europe. We think that has great advantages for British people, young people wanting to study, work and travel abroad, and we actually would help our economy. But we've said that it should be modelled on the existing youth mobility schemes that Britain already has, with Japan, with Korea, with Australia and so on. And that's a cap scheme, and that's what we want to see. Let's see what the details are that the government comes forward, but Liberal Democrats have championed this. We think it's the right step forward.
Sir Ed Davey, Liberal Democrats leader, thank you for joining us on GBN tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Sir Ed Davey speaking to me earlier today on the banks of the River Cam in Grantchester Meadows near Cambridge. It looks stunning, didn't it? Joining me now to discuss that interview is the former Labour advisor, Paul Richards. Paul Richards, thank you for joining us on GBN tonight. Great to see you there. He's done quite well, hasn't he, with his position on Trump, Ed Davey. We've seen how it might benefit Mark Carney. Might we see Ed Davey as Prime Minister in 2028 or 2029 because he opposes Trump and no one else does amongst mainstream leaders?
I think it's really interesting. We're on the brink of a by-election, a parliamentary by-election, and also a whole big set of local elections and mayoral elections. And in the normal run of play, the Lib Dems would be poised to pull off a real spectacular and gain loads of seats and probably gain the by-election. That's their stock in trade, isn't it? But they're nowhere. And I think in the by-election, they may well come fifth. And it's also fascinating that you would think that the main opposition party would be poised to gain, hundreds and hundreds of seats and possibly pull off a by-election spectacular too. And the Tories are nowhere either. So we're in the midst of a week of campaigning where the only the main winner seems to be stay at home, to hell with you all, followed by reform.
Paul, We'll wait and see until the results on Friday when we can discuss them fully, I think. But looking at that position of the Lib Dems, they have taken this firm stance, haven't they, against Donald Trump. And I wonder if that might increasingly benefit them, because people are feeling poorer in this country. Those with pensions and ISAs have seen the stock market tank since those tariffs came in, and that people have a view on Trump, and also not least what he says about groups.
Well, I mean, Trump is damaging British jobs and livelihoods now. That is true, but the British government is very different from being the leader of the Lib Dems, and he's got the ability to kind of articulate some of that anger towards Trump in a way that Starmer simply cannot, because he's representing our nation on the world stage. It may be to his advantage electorally, but these elections are about local councils. They're not actually about geopolitics necessarily. But he is positioning hard, and he does speak for many because, as I say, they've gone from bewildered, I think, to angry as to what's going on in America and how it's now impacting on us and our own well-being. Starmer, as you can see from the footage here, is decided to, flatter the egotist in the White House and to get him on side and to try and mitigate some of the worst impacts of the tariffs and all the rest of it. And, in some ways that has been a successful strategy. And as Ed Davey himself said, the US is still our major ally, even if they are behaving in a erratic and perhaps not very reliable way. In the long term, of course, they will remain a major ally for the UK. So that's why Starmer's doing what he's doing with the letter and the invitation to see the king.
Well, he's got to, but Paul Richards, he's got to, because whether you think of Trump or don't like Trump, and then my point to Ed Davey was the same, you've simply got to recognise the value of the US to the UK, and all other personal animosity falls away when faced with that importance.
Well, of course, that's right. I mean, it has to transcend party labels, and you saw that with Blair and Bush. That caused all kinds of rows at the time because they came from totally different political traditions, just like Starmer and Trump. But the US and the UK transcends all of that, and they are our ally, and they are a trading partner, and we want to make sure that this tariff nonsense doesn't actually close down British jobs.
Paul, I must ask you about the issue of what is a woman. We had quite a legalistic definition there from Ed Davey. He said that trans women are women, and women are defined in the equality legislation. So he's trying to tie his language to that Supreme Court ruling, and then he wants to debate in Parliament about how that ruling should be applied. I think a lot of GB News viewers and listeners just tear their hair out of this. It should be pretty obvious. You have trans people going through difficult situations in their lives. They need some love and support and some kindness, but equally that can't impact too much on women. Isn't that the point? And I think they look at politicians dancing around it with legalistic language and just go, what on earth are they talking about?
I mean, you do tear your hair out. If I had any hair, I'd be tearing it out. There were, here we are yet again with senior politicians talking about penises and toilets, and it's just a bizarre national conversation around something that really isn't as important as the National Health Service or cancer or any of the crime or the big issues that affect people's lives. And I think, the Supreme Court was very helpful. It was a very helpful ruling. It did set out very clearly how public policy should be pursued. And, you would hope it would close down all this nonsense now. We can focus on something a bit more mainstream.
And just very finally, Paul Richards, next few weeks, I think the European Union, Brexit will come to the fore with these summits with the European Union leaders and other big moments here with UK politics. He seemed quite engaged, didn't he, by the issue of 18 to 30 youth movement. That's something which you expect to be agreed with the European Union next month?
I think it's been trailed, and I think it's likely, and I think it would be a good thing. People that voted for Brexit didn't necessarily mean that their kids shouldn't be able to go to Europe and travel. That's not what people meant necessarily. So I think, anything like that is just a practical solution is a good way forward.
OK. Look, Paul Richards, thank you for joining us tonight on GBN Tonight. Great to see you. Thank you for coming on the show.